the Tech Canada Leadership Standard, hosted by Tech Speaker of the Year and branding expert Gair Maxwell. Real-life stories from leaders spanning the business spectrum. Now more than ever, leaders are shifting through significant decisions under accelerated timeframes with less information and bigger consequences for their companies, for their people, and for the communities that they live in. You're about to learn of the triumphs, failures, struggles, and disruptions through the first-hand account of an industry leader. Join us now for the Leadership Standard.
She bought Fatso in 2016 for the price of a used car and completely relaunched, rebranded it in the back of a health food restaurant in Victoria, British Columbia. Armed with 2 stand mixers and lots of cleaning supplies, she optimized her recipe with the goal of creating a lower cost nut butter that packed more nutrition into 1 spoonful than any other nut butter on the open market anywhere in the free world. Equipped with a master's degree in political science, specializing in genocide studies, she's also grappled with drug and alcohol addictions, entering recovery in 2010. Before Fatso, she would describe herself as painfully unemployed, but as she has since found purpose and passion with a healthy peanut butter product. Named BC Businesswoman of the Year in 2021, one of Canada's fastest growing startups in 2020. She also confidently walked away from a Dragon's Den deal. Welcome, Jill Van Gyn, to the Leadership Standard. And Jill, we understand you're not too far away from a rather significant life moment as well. If full disclosure here on the Leadership Standard, tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I think by this time next week, I should have a little baby in my arms. So the countdown's on. It's my second. So, working right up to the deadline, and, picking up the computer probably shortly after that. But yeah, we're looking forward to this new chapter, and, looking forward to the next chapter with Fatso as well.
And squeezing in a podcast before giving birth. I think that's a first on this show. So kudos to you. But right away, I'm going to ask you, I think, the question that you probably get asked a lot, and certainly anyone listening or watching would want to know: how did you come up with the name Fatso? Where does that come from? Because that instantly, I think, demands attention.
It certainly does. It's actually one of the reasons why, as you said, like I bought the company. The concept was novel. It had a lot of things that needed to be worked on, but the name really stuck with me. It just had this really irreverent and bold approach to marketing. And, in the age where, keto had become really popular, and full disclosure, I actually didn't even know what keto was when I started Fatso. We just saw this type of branding associating with the word fat become really popular. So the nice thing is it doesn't completely peg us in with the keto diet. It has given us a lot of longevity. People love the name, and people that don't initially love it, that have reached out to us, we've had really good conversations with, and really letting them know that it refers to the good plant-based fats that we put in our product. So, I've said from the beginning, it's a really unique identifier for our product, because the goal is always to have the consumer put their hand on your product. I mean, that is the biggest barrier, right? Who's going to investigate this product? So whether you love it or hate it, it'll stop you in your tracks, and you'll pick it up so you can get a better idea of what's going on with this jar of peanut butter called Fatso.
So here's something that just came to mind. Jill, take us to the moment, your Ray Kroc moment. I'm just making this up, okay? Ray Kroc goes out to sell milkshake machines to the McDonald's brothers and has an epiphany. Right. I'm sensing that you might have had the same thing when you stumbled across Fatso.
I think it was, I'm trying to figure out if there was an epiphany, because frankly, I think there's a need for people, especially like when we're talking about these founder stories and these entrepreneurial stories, where there's this like pivotal moment and there's this, sense of excitement and anything is possible. Honestly, I was like coming out of such a dark place when I found Fatso that I like didn't have time to stop and think whether this is going to work or not. The epiphanies came a lot later.
Mm-hmm.
When I found Fatso, we've been selling it out of this health food restaurant, and I was really into CrossFit at the time. It was like something that my husband and I had been attracted to since we both entered recovery from drugs and alcohol back in 2010. And, we were recently married and we wanted to get into shape, and it was just a really engaging and energetic form of fitness. And within that type of fitness, there's a lot going on with nutrition, and it was a very sort of holistic approach to like full body wellness. So I had a bit of an idea of like, I wanted to include healthy fats, but I am somebody that has always been attracted to super indulgent foods as well. But sugar is the big one, right? Like I'm not really scared of any other types of ingredients. Sugar is a big one that, I eat in moderation, of course. I wouldn't cut it out because I love it too much. But, it is one of those things that you really want to make sure that you are not consuming too much of. So when this product, I started to see it around town, I just thought this is so brilliant. The name is great. Everybody loves peanut butter. And it just had this like really great quality to it, enriched with plant-based fats. It didn't have sugar. It tasted amazing. And the packaging was really alluring. So, I just kept my eye on it for a while. And, it was through a series of, some good luck that the owners were able to give it up. Good luck for me, bad luck for them. But that I took it on. And, those first, I will say 6 months were pretty harrowing because I had a master's degree, as you said. I wasn't working in the field. I was 35 years old. And I remember driving to doing a fairly large delivery locally here in Victoria, and just like my knuckles going white in my steering wheel at the thought of like, if this doesn't work out, I don't know what's next. So there wasn't a lot of room for epiphany. There was just room for like, okay, I think this is a really good idea. I've got my hands on this. Now what? And it wasn't until later that the epiphany started to happen, where I was like, hey, Jill, you're very good at sales. You're really good at being out there in the public. And how do we market this in a way that is going to get it into the hands of consumers? And I think that's where I started to have a bit of a deeper belief in my own ability and in the ability of the product.
Just hearing you now, Jill, talk about that white knuckle drive and the sense of panic, I think that's an interesting thing for us to explore, the dark side of success. And I think our audience would love to hear your thoughts on that. We only know the success stories after the fact.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, especially with your recovery story, something about the dark side that maybe a lot of people don't.
It's so interesting. I actually love exploring this theme so much because I truly am constantly at odds with this. There's a real culture built around entrepreneurship, this hustle hard, grind every day, the glorification of 18 to 20 hour work days. And, these products of the entrepreneur being the product that we put out on, LinkedIn and Instagram. There is such a dark side to it. And you're right. We only hear the success stories. I was speaking about this with somebody recently about, there's different types of entrepreneurs, but the one that we know the most is the one that would bet it all on a 5% chance that they're going to be a runaway success. Mm-hmm. I find that a very dangerous personality trait to promote. I think young people get really caught up in this idea that they just need $1 million idea. There have been hundreds of thousands of $1 million ideas that never broke $1 million, because entrepreneurship is hard. Running a company is hard. I would posit that a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is timing. A lot of it is, does your family have wealth? Can they help you out? Did you hit the right funder at the right time? I mean, if COVID and the ensuing global crises that tended to come out of it have taught me anything, it's that it's luck, right? Like there's a lot of timing involved with this. And I myself subscribe to a different form. I appreciate sustainable growth. I don't like this idea of this infinite growth mindset, because I find that it's so unsustainable, not only for global economies and markets, but for people's individual mental health. We tie so much of who we are to our amount of productivity. And I find in particular with entrepreneurs, it is so deeply tied to their identity that, if it doesn't work out, it can be devastating. And we do only hear about, the Justin's peanut butters of the world who sold for $300 million to Hormel. We hear about the stories because they are meant to inspire. But I mean, at what cost to everybody else? I'm sure, that's a great, I'm not going to say no to a $300 million deal, but I also really try to step back from this hyper growth mindset, particularly in some of the issues that we're seeing arise around supply chain and inflation and climate change, that, infinite growth has its impacts and on the individual and on like wider communities as well.
So the headline story, as you can see behind me, is Side Hustle to Peanut Butter CEO. We know that there's a lot more involved, evidently. What's the one thing you wish people would really know, Jill, about what's buried under the headline?
I think people need to really look beyond headlines. I know that sort of just repurposing what you just said, but I think it can be quite reductive to be like, hey, like she went from like drug addict to the CEO of like a multi-million-dollar company. And there's a lot in there that, I went through in order to make this happen. And it hasn't all been that fun. Like the first 3 years of brand building was an absolute joy. That process of creation is, so rewarding and so fulfilling. There is a part of growth that you hit where all of a sudden it's like accounting and cash flow and logistics and freight and like, all the stuff that like it really pulls you away from those moments of creation, and being prepared for that and understanding that like if that's where you want to get, that's going to be part of the job. For me, like it was really basic stuff in the beginning. Like, how do I start a business? How do I get a business license? What kind of insurance do I need? Do I need a lawyer? Like, it's really basic things. I think people get really glamored by the idea of, starting a business and, creating a product. But there's a lot of technical aspect to it that gets lost in the ether and lost in that conversation. But,
if you were to look into your rear view mirror now, where do you think your passion for entrepreneurship and leadership really began? Because I know you've got the master's in political science, and I know you studied like genocides, which is kind of interesting in its own. But
yeah,
where does how did the entrepreneurship bug or DNA get inside Jill Van Gyn?
Well, and just to clarify, I actually have a master's in human security and peace building. My undergraduate was in political science with a specialization in genocide studies. I know we're splitting hairs here, but just to clarify. It's so interesting. I run off personal fulfillment. Like I like filling up my cup with things that are creative, that drive me, that move me. I have been really fortunate to find this. And, a lot of it I was looking for after I had my degree was a way to produce, to bring something to fruition in the world. That was really the driving force behind wanting to pursue a master's degree in this particular field. It was like I actually wanted to like participate in the world, in global society, in my community. And in founding Fatso, it really helped me to create something of worth And I think I just kind of ran off that. I mean, I didn't know that I had the leadership skills that I had. I didn't know that I'd never considered being an entrepreneur or a business person. My dad is a fantastic business person. He's actually a dentist, but he's a fabulous dentist, and he's 73 and he still practices. But he has been very adept at running businesses and opening new clinics. And so it could possibly be in the DNA, but I'm a fairly outgoing person and I really love engaging with people. And I think that's a quality that if you're going to be a successful leader, that, you know, you really feed off like other people and like the ability to move towards milestones, and, you know, somebody giving me a problem and saying like, this is a big problem that you're likely not going to be able to overcome, and then overcoming that. I mean, there's just a lot of fuel in that particular area. Having come from 15 years in addiction, where I was unproductive and floundering and didn't know my place in the world, the opportunity to find that was a real driving factor in embracing how to run a company.
How so? That makes me curious, Jill. How did the experience with addiction somehow make for a better leader?
Yeah, well, you spend 15 years like, and it's not like I didn't want to work or I didn't want to be productive. You know, I've always had a terrible fear of not being successful. Both my parents were very successful, and you know, this is just like, that was my lot. Like I'm an addict and I succumbed to that disease. And coming out of it, it was like finding superpowers, because I was a terrible student when I was in addiction. I was an okay student in my undergrad because I really wasn't engaged that much in drugs and alcohol at that point. I had difficulty in my teen years. I went off to university and I found that ability to be productive. And like, I was a very good critical thinker and a really good writer. I spent some time as a food journalist as well. And, you know, finding that sense of fulfillment and productivity actually staved off a lot of my addiction. Now, it did come back after I graduated. Things went to all hell, but once I, you know, got clean and stayed clean, I amazed myself. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm a capable person here. And I'm smart, and I want to see if I can use this for good. And so pursuing a master's degree, I was like, I'm going to get myself back on track. You know, I studied political science and, you know, genocide studies in East Africa. And I had, sorry, I'm in the co-working space. People pop by to say hi. Yeah, I really was motivated by these newfound superpowers that I had. And it motivates me to this day, because there's all sorts of things that come up in business that you're like, I don't know, am I going to be good at this? Let's find out.
Well, that's for sure. There's certainly no lack of ways to challenge yourself as an entrepreneur, as a business leader. It starts every day. Your feet hit the floor in the morning. But I wanted to shift, if we could, somewhat shamelessly into the product itself. And we have a wonderful research team here at Tech Canada, but I want to get very personal, Jill. And you and I hardly know each other. We met 5 minutes before the podcast. And I want to talk about the peanut butter itself. You know why? Because I love peanut butter. And since I was a kid, I've loved peanut butter. And I think peanut butter has gotten a bad rap over the last, 10, 15 years. So how do we do this without shame? Jill, how do we talk about the peanut butter right now? Like, do you like it with 2 slices of bread or 3 slices of bread? Do you combine it with the jams? Like, this to me is your opportunity to wax eloquent about all that is magnificent about the peanut butter itself.
So it's really interesting. One of the things, so I do have this kind of like parallel, like when I was doing my master's degree in Northern Uganda, I did research, and my research was very unrelated to peanut butter. I was looking at the rise of like an emerging oil industry and the nexus of a post-conflict society, very much out of this sort of peanut butter realm. But as I said, I was really into nutrition and CrossFit at the time, and I went out there. Now, Northern Uganda has been in a cycle of conflict, up until relatively recently, of civil conflict for decades. So there, in fact, longer than that, but there just hasn't been an opportunity to really develop a broad regional cuisine. So there was a lot of like boiled flours, millet flour, corn flour, boiled greens, boiled goat. I found out very quickly what old goat smells and tastes like. So you can tell the difference between young and old. The palate is not developed there. So I'm a foodie. So when I got to Uganda, I was really excited to explore the cuisine, and I found out that that wasn't that wasn't going to be the case. They did have peanut butter there, and they called it OD. They don't call them peanuts; they call them ground nuts or G nuts. And this was the most delicious peanut butter I'd ever had in my life. And I swore up and down they put honey in it because it had this like really sweet quality to it. They have these beautiful little tiny sweet peanuts that they harvest, and it's really a cornerstone of the diet. They use it in sauces and soups. They don't use it in the more like sort of sweet space that we like to use it in with like jams and on toast. Like that was, people were really surprised that I did that. But it was the one regional food stuff that I could really gravitate towards. And as I did my research and went out to different communities, often women would be out in the field and they'd be harvesting peanuts. And I would go out there and I would help to harvest. And I learned how to make peanut butter from scratch. And it's a fascinating process. So not only is it the cornerstone of a diet out there, peanuts are remarkably resilient. So they don't require a lot of water, and they're not highly labor intensive. So they're a very sustainable nut. So let's dispel all this stuff. For some reason, people just like think of peanut butter as not as healthy. And that's not true. They have different nutritional makeups than other nuts. But I learned this process with some friends that I'd made. I was staying at like a Catholic religious center while I was doing my research. And the women that worked in the kitchen became friends of mine, and they taught me how to make peanut butter from scratch. So I got these 2 huge bags of peanuts after I went into a community and did some research, and they gave it to me as a gift. And I thought, I really don't want to waste this. Like, let's learn how to make peanut butter. So it's a really cool process of shelling, which took me 2 weeks. And like, your fingers will bleed if you've never done this before. It is very intense. And then you shake the shells so they separate from the nut because they're a different weight. And you kind of slough them off like this. And then there's this roasting process over an open fire. And then you spread your nuts out on a mat, and there's these beautiful little red skins on the peanuts, as you'll know. And you take a rock and you grind them out. So it removes the skin from the nut itself. And then you put that in a basket. And this is my favorite part. You put that in a basket and you go find a bucket and a stiff wind. And you pour the basket over the bucket. So the nuts fall down straight and the skins blow away in the wind. And you repeat this process until you only have the nut. And then you take it to a local trading post and you find the OD lady who will then grind it for you. And they have these like little grinders that they do manually. So that's the process of making peanut butter in northern Uganda. And when I didn't come home and be like, oh, I'm going to start a peanut butter business. I just really loved the idea of it being the cornerstone of people's diets. And I'm not just talking about like in Africa. On almost every continent on the planet, we're able to grow peanuts. It is the cornerstone of diets across the globe, and they're a highly sustainable protein and mineral-rich food that we find in cuisines from everywhere in Asia to South America, North America. And I just find it like an amazingly powerful little nut. And it gets undersold as, something that's a cheap commodity. So when I started Fatso, the idea of taking this really great protein-rich, mineral-rich nut and then enhancing it with really great plant-based fats, that was something that I could really wrap my head around. And I knew that other consumers could as well. Now, you asked me to get technical and wax poetic, and I feel like I just went on and on about peanuts. But I do believe so strongly in that little nut. And, you look at like almonds that require so much water, droughts in California, and you go to your nut butter aisle and you'll find jars of almond and cashew butter for $15 to $20. And they're not better for you. I think there was just, I don't know, they got some good PR for a while. And they're, the peanut is mightily good for you and a lot cheaper. So,
and in the realm of PR and public reception, curious to know your answer, Jill, when someone tries to advance, and I'm sure it's happened, right? And this is the beauty, I think, of doing this podcast, is that we never rehearse, everything's live and happening in the moment. But I'm sure someone has come up to you and taken issue with the name itself.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so in other words, someone's going to find it offensive. You're doing some public shaming of a certain segment of an audience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you, as a business leader, respond to individuals who are trying to advance whatever politically correct agenda they feel they need to advance?
Well, there's two types. I will say overall, 98% of people understand the spirit with which it's intended, and we're grateful for that. It's a pretty old-fashioned term, and I don't find that it's used in the zeitgeist as much as it used to be. But there are two types of people within that 2%, and there are some people who have come to me very earnestly and said, this is a trigger word for me. I was fat shamed as a kid, and this is something I was called. I'm never going to take that away from people. I am never going to say like, no, you know what? You're overplaying it. You're overreacting. That's super valid for people. And we often have an honest conversation about it and say, we named it this because it's like fat so good or fat so revolutionary. We refer to the good fats. It's like, as I said, irreverent and it's bold. And we would never wish to harm people. When we've had those earnest conversations with people, the vast majority have turned out to be like, okay, I totally get it, right? Or they might say, you know what, this isn't something I'm going to be able to keep in my house, but I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm never going to say like, you don't get to feel the way you feel, because I think for some people, it might be triggering for sure. Now we had this like really intense, it was a couple weeks where actually this woman wrote a book called Fat ! So ? And it was a body shaming group, and they're from Southern California, and they went a little bit overboard on the sort of public shaming of the company, where they had many of their members like swarm our Instagram, Facebook. It felt very disingenuous. But I did end up having a conversation with the woman who authored that book and really offered like our perspective on this. Like, we're trying to like take the fear out of fat, right? And what's so interesting about that word fat too, is that the English language is the only language that uses the word fat to refer to fat in food and fat on a human body. So when we think about body shaming and like, eating equating to obesity and that type of thing, it's so inextricably linked because of the way that we use language, right? So fat on a steak and will immediately translate to fat on a person's body. And that doesn't exist in other languages. So it actually doesn't translate well anywhere else. But I think this is part of this like hypersensitivity around fat and food and how we fear that and how we link that to the way people consume food. And I think if we can unlink that, we have a lot more people who are, happier with their body and aren't having a lot of issues with, dysregulated eating and that type of thing, because I think that can often drive that connection with food and body, really, really drive some of those disorders. So I never would say people are not allowed to feel the way they feel. They're completely allowed to do that. But I will say that most people understand the spirit with which it's intended.
And I think what that dovetails nicely into, if we can spread it on a little thicker, pardon the pun, it's this identity of poetic license. And obviously, there's a double entendre, there's multiple meanings with your name. It's no different than how one interprets lyrics of a song. I'm curious to know your thoughts on a bold brand identity. So many business leaders like to play wishy-washy and not offend anyone, stay in the mushy middle, but you're not. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
We're interesting that way. We are known as a hyper progressive company. We have really, and one of the things that I've been most proud of in my career is the way that we have approached using our brand platform to amplify voices that are generally unheard. And this really comes from my own background. Like, I didn't get to work in the international field. I wanted to go out and like help people, to be reductive about it. But, I wanted to work for people that were unheard or, oppressed in some way. And I didn't get to do that on the global stage. But when I started the business, I was so disappointed in myself for not fulfilling, the promise of working in the field after my master's degree, that I said, I'm going to go out, and if I have any success with this, we're going to make a stand with the brand. And we got a lot of traction with the brand. I started to have a larger voice on social media. And around International Women's Day, I remember there was a lot of like, oh, we're doing this, that, and the other, and women lifting up women, but it felt very generic. And I thought, let's do something specific. Like, I have a bit of extra money in the company. Let's raise some money for some voices that are really unheard. And I thought, well, who's missing in this conversation around, women's rights and, International Women's Day, whatever that means. And to me, it was sex workers. It was these people that are often stigmatized and marginalized, much like the drug addict is today. And sex workers certainly still are. And I thought, this is a voice I could lift up. Nobody's paying attention to this. And we raised some money. We matched the donations. I think we donated, it was about $1,700 to a local resource center that deals with sex work. And they had never had a donation that big from a company that was willing to say, hi, I'm from Fatso, and publicly say, we're going to donate to the sex worker rights organization. So, we've followed that as a mandate in our philanthropic endeavors and in our involvement with social justice, is that we look for marginalized voices and unheard voices. And in that way, we've been very unapologetic. We do not shy away from very controversial topics, such as sex work, such as harm reduction, such as advocating for houseless people. One that we did during the railway blockades for Indigenous sovereignty a few years back. We had a lot of people in the business community being like, they need to be forced off these railways. And I kind of thought, like, I have a big business community that's speaking for me, and I do not agree with involving the police in this. I feel like this is an actually actionable form of activism. It's getting people's attention. And we produced on the East Coast, and we were about to have this like run come by rail from Atlantic, Canada out to British Columbia. And we were at real risk of actually not having peanut butter in Western Canada. And I wrote an op-ed for the CBC stating that, we did support these protests, that not all business leaders are a monolith, and that this was a really valid form of protest, despite the fact that it was likely going to impact us and our consumers. And the hate mail was spectacular. I can tell you, like, it was incredible. But the support was also overwhelming. And, we've always taken a really irreverent and bold stance. We have enjoyed a lot of public accolades on social media and across many different media platforms. And to me, and this is just me, I just thought, like, what an opportunity to move forward some more progressive ideas. So when you ask, like, we are unapologetic in a way that I feel is productive, and amplifies people who don't get a platform. And we've been very successful in that, and we'll continue to do that as well.
Jill, you said something about stigmatized and marginalized, and then I'm connecting some dots about you admitting to being painfully unemployed.
Yeah.
Love to hear your thoughts on people who are struggling with that right now. In other words, we tend to tie so much of our self-worth too closely to how we are perceived as, being producers in a society. What firsthand practical advice do you have for those folks who might be listening or watching right now, trying to get through that stage of life?
I don't have a ton of advice because I didn't deal with it well. I will say this, that if there are people out there that are struggling with unemployment or finding a purpose in their lives, because that can also be equally as devastating, is that one of the things I felt when I was unemployed is that it is such a highly stigmatized state of being, because at the beginning, it's like, no, you're going to be great. Like you've got qualifications, you'll get a job. And then as time marches on, you become more depressed and you have to face rejection after rejection and, staying at home. And like, how many times can you apply to a job or do another cover letter or, get through to the third or fourth interview only to be told like you won out to another, or somebody won out, like there was another candidate that got hired. I was trying to get government work at the time. It was during a hiring freeze. And I would go through these interviews and investing in my wardrobe and filling out these incredibly intense applications, and only to be told after the third round interview that they've made the job redundant. And there's a point where your family and friends start to think like, well, why doesn't she have a job? And I find that it's a very specific type of almost like depression and mental illness, where at least if I was struggling from something else that was diagnosable, I may be able to get the support of family, but unemployment can't be diagnosed with unemployment. And I think now where jobs are scarce and hard to come by, and the cost of living is so high and people are really gunning for jobs that they need in order to survive. I would just say some of the stuff that people are feeling out there is unrecognized and unspoken for. And being unemployed, I think, the media tells you that you're lazy and that you don't want to work. There aren't a lot of people who don't want to work. There are people who want to work and they want to survive. But, there's so many jobs that are exploitative and people are trying to get up and out of those. And I would just say to people who maybe have somebody in their lives that is unemployed is give them a bit of grace, right? It is exhausting. It is depressing. It does a real number on your feelings of self-worth. And I sympathize with anybody who is looking for work or has been in this position and felt unseen, because I really felt that way. I really, really felt that way. So, yeah, I feel like we should talk about it more, is like how depression, comes out of being unemployed, and how it creates a really vicious cycle of low self-worth, low self-esteem, and that can be, irreparably damaging to somebody if they're unemployed long enough.
And certainly, I think since the pandemic, so many of us are more, I would hope to think, more sensitive and appreciative of some of those dynamics. Now, one, avenue that some people have been really exploring since the pandemic, especially, is starting their own business, is entrepreneurship. You once mentioned that starting a business is a great way to find out what your insecurities are. Tell us about that.
Oh, comparison is the death of joy. And that, to me, is something that you cannot escape in the world of entrepreneurship. Because whether you've started with a novel idea or you have started something that is innovating within a sector or disrupting within a category, you will find somebody to compare yourself to. And I really feel like it is so easy to always be looking over your shoulder and saying, what is this person doing? Why am I not doing that? Why didn't I have that success? You know, I struggle on LinkedIn because like, I feel like I have to go and put out these like, oh, we got this listing, we're doing this, that, and there's all of this stuff underneath that really gets lost in the ether. And I think that like, I have struggled. People see me and they're like, you're killing it, Jill. Like, what a success story. And like, yeah, I've had some successes for sure, but like, it's not all that glitters is gold. Like, I can tell you that much. And it's really hard to speak candidly in the moment about our failures and our, the things that hold us back. And entrepreneurship, yes, is a great way to find out how insecure you are because it's only you. And you know how many times I've like been in a stressful situation and had like the fleeting thought of like, I should ask my boss about this. And I'm like, oh God, I am the boss. There is nobody else to turn to, right? It is all you. So it can really create a lot of pressure. But yeah, I often tell myself that when I see people who are succeeding and I start to feel like jealousy or I start to feel like low self-worth, I have to remind myself, comparison is the death of joy.
I just chuckled to myself hearing you describe that because it's like that saying, I am the boss of me.
Yeah.
Like,
it's really scary sometimes.
Well, and so supplementary to that is that without naming names or anything, but can you pinpoint, Jill, a specific situation, a moment of failure on your leadership journey in terms of, well, what happened and then how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic has been really tough to navigate. And I think this idea of like pivot and adapt, we thought we were doing a lot of those things, but I think I have failed a little bit in, maybe leaning a little bit too much into my my altruism or my philanthropic side sometimes. Like we donated over $200,000 worth of peanut butter during the pandemic to food banks across Canada and into the United States. Now, there were some reasons why we had to move that product. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just all we were like pumping it off the line and giving it away, but we donated to the detriment of the company a significant amount. Now, in my defense at the time, food banks were really struggling. I mean, they were cleared out. There was no ability to buy new foodstuffs for the food bank shelves. People were not donating food anymore because there were fears of food shortages. So we really shifted into being an ad hoc food security agency. I may have gone a little bit overboard in that. And, I feel like I should have stepped back and said, I need to not only look at my community, but I need to make sure that the company is safe as well. And I think that was a really critical decision during that period of time. Now, I don't regret it because there was a part of me that like, that was what my degree was in, like food security and human security. That's what I was trained for. And we did that very successfully. And it did gain us a lot of accolades, but it's been hard to get us back on track. We ended up not profitable that year. And it's been difficult to really manage because we thought, it was funny, like in 2020, we all thought 2020 was the year to be worried about. I don't know why we packaged things into a year because that's not how time works. But we thought, okay, 2020 is going to be the time that we really need to be worried. And it wasn't, it was 2021 and 2022. I mean, when I'm talking about economic aspects, when I talk about health aspects, obviously 2020 was a devastating year. But yeah, I think sometimes like I may become overly passionate about certain areas of my business and what I want to do with it to the detriment of, the company overall. And that's a hard lesson for anybody to learn. But, if I could go back in time and change it, I mean, I may be a little bit more austere in the way that I was giving out peanut butter. But I think, it's really hard to take yourself out of that moment. It's not who I am. I am not a calculated person. I'm a big picture person.
Signature question. We ask every guest on the leadership standard and we get a different answer every time. Are you ready, Jill Van Gyn?
I'm ready.
What is your definition of leadership?
It's knowing what you are not good at and filling those gaps.
Expand on that.
I think I shy away from the term leadership and leader. I feel, I don't know, it makes me feel some sort of way. But I think that the ability to recognize what you are not good at and building that team or the resources or infrastructure around that is where leadership is the most valuable. And I think it takes a lot of humility to do that. Now, I'm not saying that there are leaders out there that have, there's a lot of leaders out there that have a lot of ego who have built that infrastructure, but to do it in a sustainable and holistic way and to really honor your employees and to really honor the systems around you, having a degree of humility and going like, I don't excel in this. Like full disclosure here, you put an Excel spreadsheet in front of me and I'm going to start to sweat and turn pale. I wish I could do that, but I've found people that were really good at utilizing that to the benefit of the company. So knowing what I'm not good at, I think is the first step of, really grounded leadership practices. I can't do everything, right? And, if I did think that, I would just end up micromanaging everybody and maybe trying to do things that I had no business doing. So I will say, knowing your weaknesses is probably, for me, the first step in grounded leadership.
Let's take a moment here and get even more up close and personal. Are you ready?
I mean, we've talked about babies and addiction, but yeah, I mean,
let's really get into it. You ready, Jill?
I'm ready.
What books are you reading right now?
Love this question. Why don't people ever ask this question? They're super not business related. Books are my escape. So I'm a very big fan of sci-fi, fantasy, and speculative fiction. That is my happy place. I read every night. That's my husband and I have a rule. We don't have any TV in the bedroom. So right now I'm just finishing up a book called The Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and it's grounded in Chinese mythology, and it's really a lovely read. And I have a stack of books ready to go for when I'm at home with the new baby. So I'll be reading some Murakami, who's a Japanese fantasy writer, or maybe speculative, a Jeff Vandermeer book called A Particular Peril. He wrote the Annihilation series. That's a fascinating investigation of like boundaries and environment and encroachment. I recently was introduced to the Golden Compass series, his Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. He wrote a prequel and then a 2-book sequel. The second book has just come out. I think a lot of people think that those are adolescent books, but he has said they are not for children. And trust me, some of the themes in there are not for kids. I had to go to the kids section to get it. I was shocked. Anyways, that's like that's my sort of like escape from life. And, I've, being introduced to that world, sci-fi, fantasy, and speculative fiction is a place I like to escape to, after 10 p.m. at night.
You're alone in your car, just you. What 3 top artists are on your playlist?
Oh, no. I'm a podcast person. I mean, I have a love of music. I'm really into like listening to a lot of Florence and Machine these days. My kid loves it. But if I had to pick my like top podcasts, this is another escape for me. And I know that most people will be like, how I built this. And no, I listen to something called All Fantasy Everything, which is one of my favorite podcasts. They draft random topics. So if you're into like football drafts, it's the same format, except they'll draft things like deep sea creatures. Really fun. Love daily news podcasts like Front Burner from CBC, and The Daily, and anything that's serialized, I'll get into. So yeah, if you're in my car, I'll probably shush you and put on a good podcast.
I hear the Tech Canada Leadership Standard is a highly recommended podcast, which I'm sure.
Yep, right at the top of the list.
Which I'm sure Stephen Christopherson and Mark Johnson and everyone at Tech would approve of. Yep. That being said, we've talked about your giving birth You're what, a week away.
Yes.
We've talked about addiction. You just recently brought us into your bedroom with your husband, as though we can't get any more personal. So that means we need to know, what are your best binge watching recommendations?
Oh, is also a good question. I am re-binging The West Wing right now. It's not easy to find, but I'm a fan of the political dramas. Like I just recently started it. I thought this would be a fun thing to do during the rainy season. But I'm also, as I said, like I'm a big fan of like the fantasy stuff. So I am, I've watched Game of Thrones a few times, and I'm really into the Lord of the Rings, the new franchise that's out on Prime. And definitely watching the Game of Dragons, which has been really spectacular. So yeah, I do stay pretty firmly in the realm of the political dramas. I love a good legal drama. We were just talking about The Good Wife before we started. And The West Wing is what I'm watching, because I'm not sleeping much anymore. So I'm up watching episodes from the 1990s of The West Wing.
Jill, I'm sure you've given this a lot of thought, but if you could pick anyone to play you in your film biopic, who would play you?
Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna say Jennifer Lawrence. I think we have a similar personality. I mean, she's if we're gonna go big, I mean, it may as well go big, but I've always appreciated her ability to be so fallible and laugh at herself and really roll with the punches. And I've admired her public personality.
If day-to-day life at your company was a movie or TV show, what would it be?
Okay, two things came to mind. The first one was like The Wolf of Wall Street, and then the other one was The Office, and they couldn't be more different. So I don't know how to answer that question, because I don't think they're either of those things. But I don't know, maybe there's like a lovability of The Office, and then the internal drive of growth and strategy and that type of stuff. So maybe we can combine those two.
Speaking of TV shows, you were on Dragon's Den.
It was.
And you walked away from the deal. I think our audience, the people listening, watching, would love to hear, Jill Van Gyn pull the curtain back behind what happened.
It wasn't a good deal. It just wasn't a good deal. I actually did take the deal on air, but later walked away from it. It was so funny. I was sitting in the front row of a conference recently, and Arlene Dickinson was there, and she was taking questions, and I can't remember how it came up, but I said, we've actually met, and it was a little punchy, to be honest. I feel like there was some hurt feelings there. I don't know. But I didn't walk away from the deal on camera. I just after I looked at it, I was like, this isn't a good deal. So I'm not going to take it. And I didn't. And I actually made a great deal after that with some local investors here in Victoria. So, that experience was lovely. And Arlene Dickinson is also so lovely and so much fun and brilliant, and somebody that I certainly look up to. And I went there to get into business with her, but I also wasn't going to make a deal that wasn't good, so had to walk away.
Try this one. What's the closest thing you've ever experienced to real magic?
Oh, what a lovely question. Oh, I know what I should say, and it's giving birth to a child, but let's not do that. Living on the West Coast, there's mysticism out here. I've been really fortunate to grow up in a, we call it supernatural BC. And I don't know, there's something in the air up here. My sister lives in Ucluelet, and she took us to some pretty remote places. And there's just like a real energy in the air when you get out of the city and get into something that is where you're kind of not supposed to be. So, I feel like I'm really fortunate where I get to experience that. I would love an opportunity to think harder about that, because I think that's a really awesome question. And I know I'm going to come up with some experience in my life where I'm going to be like, oh, that's what I should have said. But there is like an element of living on the West Coast where we just get afforded these breathtaking opportunities, right on our doorstep, all the time. And, it's the reason I moved back from the East Coast to live here, is just that allure of like this really wild place that's, accessible with a few hours drive. So I'll have to say that, and like, yes, childbirth is magical, of course.
If you were to think back of all the mentors or, um, different people who've come in and out of your life or still in your life, what's the best advice you've ever received that is still true to this day?
I think, somebody told me in early recoveries, don't tie your self-worth to your level of productivity. And I've said that before earlier in this podcast. And that to me has been a way to get myself back down from like spinning out in my head, because it's really easy to do that. It's not just entrepreneurship. Everybody ties themselves to like this idea of working hard and producing. And, I encourage people to like, and I have to work on this every single day. Like even today, like I didn't even want to come into work. I'm so tired right now. And I was like, no, like you have this company to run. There's a lot of like, stress and pressure around the company right now. And like, you've got to get in and work. And I'm just like, okay, I'm having a baby in a week. Like maybe I should, maybe log off for a bit. So that is always comes from a place of that, and like giving yourself permission to step back and, take care of yourself, and not always feel like you have to be doing in order to be, I think is some good advice that everybody really could take. Take a nap. I mean, just take the nap. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, Jill, if you could see into the future with a super mystical crystal ball out there in your beautiful West Coast, what would you like to know for both you and Fatso?
I just want to know that there's like sustained happiness. That sounds so cheesy, but I've never wanted for much more than just like safety, security, and happiness. And if that's a guarantee for the future, like that's good enough for me. It doesn't have to be the $300 million exit. I don't need 4 boats. I really don't need 4 boats. I just want like, contentment, security. Those are the 2 things that I would hope I see in my future.
And especially for those people who've been listening throughout and enjoying learning your story and what you've gone through, what's the number one question that leaders need to be asking right now?
How have you embraced your failure, and how have you built your business around learning from that? We don't talk about failure nearly enough. And it's something that I do like to bring up quite often. I mean, I have learned to embrace failure in a way that like, I don't think a lot of people do, but I used to host this storytelling event where we did, and I wanted to have people on. It was in the food industry, and, was to talk about a time that you failed. And I had so many people being like, yeah, I just don't have that in my career. And I was like, you liars, you liars. Failure, I think, is something that, we are so fallible and delicate and prone to failure as human beings. And the more we embrace that, the more we learn, grow, and progress. And that's what I would say.
Jill Van Gyn, it's been a real slice, and of course I've got this craving now for your peanut butter. But where can our people who are watching and listening connect with you online?
Yeah, you can find us at Eat Fatso on Instagram. That's where to find us. If you're interested in investing with Fatso, we are doing a raise right now on Front Funder. So that's Front Funder, FUNDR, no E, /Fatso. We close our first round in 2 days. So you can invest for as little as $500. If you have $1 million lying around, feel free. You can also invest that. Yeah, you can just look us up there if you're interested in actually getting in on the action. And yeah, people can reach out anytime. Jill at eatfatso.com. I'm a pretty accessible person. I'll get back to you.
Jill, it has been an honor, and thank you so much for joining us here, and wishing you all the best continued success, and of course the blessed event coming next week.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate Jill Van Gyn joining us here today on the Leadership Standard. If you want to know more about Tech Canada and its world-class programs, check out the website, www.tech-canada.com. Well, what was it that Jill spoke of through our conversation that made you stop and think? I know for me, right away, I made a note. Comparison is the thief of joy. Don't tie your personal self-esteem to your productivity, but again, what was yours? Feel free to share with us. You can send us an email. We do check those emails. It's podcast@techcanada.com, podcast@tec-canada.com. And of course, if you enjoyed the Leadership Standard, feel free to share with others in your online and social networks. Hit all those like, subscribe, and share buttons, and do it while eating a Fatso-laden peanut butter sandwich. I think that would enhance the experience for anyone, because what are we trying to do here? We're just trying to inspire someone else to grab hold of the clutch and go full throttle in this new frontier. So on behalf of everyone here at the Tech Canada headquarters in downtown Calgary, Alberta, Alexander, Stephen, Catherine L., Mark, Melissa, this is Gair Maxwell, thanking you for stopping by and joining us here at the Leadership Standard.